Okay, everyone, welcome to Moonscapes number 41. First of all, let me apologize for the audio in that last Moonscapes 40, where I did the sketch of the crater. Apparently, I have a bad USB port, and my microphone was plugged into it, and I think that's what gave us the bad audio on parts of the video, especially near the end. So I apologize for that. Hopefully this setup here will work a little bit better. I just wanted to touch very briefly on a few things we kind of touched on during that video, on video 40. As I said, this is video 41. And that was lunar changes. There's a group out there, I've seen several videos where they claim that every drawing they see is different. Photographs are different. That they're being lied to. It's not. We don't really. The moon's not really what we think it is. It's a hologram, or it's this, or it's that sort of thing. And I just don't know where some of the silliness comes from. But I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. I've got examples here of drawings. And I forgot to have a pointer ready for me. But you can notice here you have two drawings, and they're of the creator Cassendi, one of our old friends from imaging. They're done by two observers. One I think is by a guy by the name of Nelson, another by a Philip Foth. Foth is this one, and Nelson is this one. Foth is from the 1800s. So I'm not sure when Nelson's was done. You can notice the amount of detail is quite a bit different. Foth goes into much more detail, has much more detail here on the crater floor. These two features here are slightly different. This is kind of football shaped. This is circular shaped. But you can see they're similar, but yet different. And that's nothing more than the effect of having two different observers and with different drawing abilities. So they're not going to be exactly the same. Where this idea of coming, the one I really listened to was he had a bunch of maps that went all the way back, and coming forward, he said each time he looked at the map, the crater was showing different. So to him, that was proof that we're being lied to. Well, no, that's just the optics got better as we went from the 17th to the 1800s. The achromatic telescope was developed. And different observers have different abilities in drawing. And you have to remember that we mapped the moon back then, not with photography, but by sketching, by drawing. You can take two people, put them with the exact same telescope, exact same time, observing side by side, have them draw the same crater with the same eyepiece, same power, everything the same. And those two sketches will look similar, but they're not going to be the same. Each observer has different drawing abilities. So that's what happens with that. It's not changes going on in the moon. I don't know how they get that out of this, but I'm just here to rebuke that idea. You can see the drawings up here above are our old friend, the Higgins Rill, which is here, and you can see they're very similar in these two drawings. Krasner crater is here and here. They're similar. But again, Philip Foth goes into much more detail here than our other observer, I believe Nelson over here. Foth brags, if you notice, see all these little tiny craters that are absent on this other drawing. He brags, Mr. Foth. He's a very colorful character from the 1800s, and he brags in his observing ability, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later with the little battle he had with another observer from my time in the 1800s when they were mapping the moon. But I have a couple other examples here. Let me see if we've got one handy right here. Here's an example of the crater Plato. Now this one was done back by Madler in the 1800s. Telescope was not the greatest quality. Notice he drew banded lines on the floor of the crater. Again, these are just line sketches. They aren't really detailed. Now, here's a more modern day one done by an amateur astronomer. Look at the detail in here. It's much greater. The crater is drawn very much the same, so that doesn't change. It's just a line drawn. It doesn't show a lot of mountainous detail. But notice the detail in the crater floor is very much different than the stripes of the other one. And that has a lot to do with, first of all, the other one was over 100 years old. This one was done with a much newer telescope, better quality telescope. and somebody that spent a lot of time charting what he saw on the floor of the crater. Now, a lot of this is subjective, and some observers see things and others don't. And again, that's why we have these tremendous differences in opinion in what we see drawn. I'm not sure if I have anything that's going to help us farther on. Here's just another page that shows. Look at this. This is amazing. I find this page amazing. All these drawings are the same crater, the crater Alphonse. Alphonse is tremendously important and known for having outbursts of color and outgassing, and all of which have been proved to be false, by the way. Just observers seeing different things on different nights that appear to be color. We've never been able to prove any of these to be true. There's still some astronomers who think there might be something to some of this. There may be some very small volcanic activity going on, but for the most part, we think the moon is completely dead, and there is no outgassing going on. But look at each one of these drawings. It's done by a different observer. They went into varying amounts of detail. They show, some of the same features, very similar, but yet different. And a lot of the observers went into more detail, showing more objects and more spots where they thought they saw different things. But again, now this is just different observers with different observing skills. Some were keener eyed than others, and some had better drawing abilities than other observers. But anyway, moving on, I want to move on to, well, I'll show you one more. That's kind of neat. This is actually a comparison of a photograph of the crater Plato. And you can see the very sharp shadows here, and that's caused by the sun coming from this direction, throwing these shadows out on the floor of the crater. Now, this drawing very nicely shows that, if I can get it. My mic is kind of in the way. Let me see if I can move that a little bit. And let's see. There, well, you can see that pretty good there. You can see the shadows. See how they're thrown out on the floor, just like the drawing. But the interesting thing there is this shadows, they'll change very quickly. If you were to take another photograph or another drawing of this crater 6 hours from now, or from the time these were done, the shadows will change tremendously over time. So that's another thing that happens. You have to realize that these features change and look very, very different under varying lighting conditions. I'm not sure if this is the book. Yeah, it does. It has a picture of the crater Schiller. Here, you can see it under a semi-high sun angle, not real high, but you can see a nice shadow here, and the floor fully lit back here. Now, look at it on the night. I'm going to flip this around so you can see it here. Now, look at it on the night up near a full moon. We only have a very little tiny shadow here. The shape of the crater is very much similar, but all the fancy and neat detail that we saw in this photograph, because of the low sun angle and the sharp shadows, disappears in this view here. So these features change their appearance just due to sun angle alone. Now, I want to touch on one thing that I find really, really fascinating. This observer is one of my favorites of all time. This is a map from the late 1800s by an observer by the name of Johann Krieger. And he did something differently from everybody else. This is the crater Cassini. We have observed this many times in our lunar videos. There's that little bridge-like structure that comes into the crater. You can see the structure inside the crater here. What Mr. Krieger did was take low contrast photographs of the moon from Paris Observatory and Lick Observatory. Now, back in the late 1800s, photography was just really getting started, and these exposures of the moon were relatively long, sometimes several seconds long, so the scene would ripple the effect of the structure and blur it, and they weren't the best of images. But what they did do is made a perfect format for Krieger to use. He would take enlarged prints, they said from Paris or Lick, to the telescope, and when the shadow throw was about the same as matching as this photograph that's underneath here, and he then would sketch in very, very delicately all these nice fine little features. I'm not sure if you can see the little fine lines that are in this drawing here and all this fine detail. The detail here, the central peak and around these formations here. Now, a lot of that didn't show up in the photograph. He has drawn a lot of this in, but he's done so in such a great way. He was a great draftsman also, that it makes almost like a photographic atlas, even though these are still a hand-drawn atlas. Over here we have another example of his work, another area. This is our favorite area of the moon. The Higgins Rill area. You can see the Higgins Rill running along here, and all this beautiful structure in here. I believe he's got another one on the next page somewhere. Yeah, this is also another one of his. This is the western part of Mare Tranquillitatis. This is up near the Apollo 11 landing site, actually. And look at the tremendous detail he's got drawn in here. You can see he's shadowed in these craters like I did with that felt tip pen when I showed you how to sketch the moon. But he's added a lot of very, very sharp detail. Now, my old friend Mr. Falth there used to really not agree with Krieger's work, and I don't know why. I think maybe he was a bit jealous because Krieger's maps were absolutely beautiful. But Philip Falth claimed to be a much better observer. He brags about some of his photographs, and if you take a map from Falth, which I don't happen to have one here, and compare it to the same area of Krieger's, you'll see that Falth has drawn in some smaller craterlets and smaller detail. So there may be something to the fact that he may have been using a larger instrument, higher power, and maybe had some little better drawing skills. I'm not sure. But anyway, he really went after Krieger, and I don't know why. Krieger never said anything about Falth in a bad way. But he was just, I guess he was afraid that Krieger was going to steal his thunder. And unfortunately, Mr. Krieger was a young man who wanted to be a professional astronomer, like myself. And like myself, he was very poor in math, and so he never made it, as I never made being a professional. But he was self-sustaining. He was able to run a private observatory where he would observe all night, make these beautiful, beautiful maps, spend all day working and finishing up these maps in his office, and then the next night be right back at his telescope. And he wore himself out. He literally drained the life out of him, and he died very young. He died at, I believe, at the age 39, something like that. Near the end of his career, his doctors actually told him he had to give up the observing. It was really doing him in, which he did. He got rid of all his equipment and gave up observing, but he still passed away about 6 months later. He had not finished this map. Some of the observers picked up the work and carried on a little the unfinished parts after Krieger's death and produced the maps. Now, Philip Falth, as I said, did not like Krieger at all. He didn't like to be compared to him. He didn't think Krieger's work was up to his, although I think Krieger's maps were much better and much more realistic looking. But Philip Falth was an avid observer, and I think I've told this story before, but it's worth repeating very quickly. He was such an avid observer. He was a school teacher, and he built a small observatory just outside of the village he was teaching in, and he had about a half-mile walk from the school up to his observatory where he would work at night and then come back to, be right there the next morning for his classes. Well, shortly after he built this observatory, he was transferred to a new school district about 10 miles away. And now, all of a sudden, to get to his observatory, he had to walk after school 3 miles to a train station, take a train 10 miles to the next village over, go off the train, walk another half-mile up to the top of the hill to his observatory, where he would spend the night observing and drawing, and then have to repeat the trip after spending all night in his observatory the next morning back to his village where he was teaching. The 10-mile, the half-mile walk to the train station, a 10-mile return trip by train, and the 3-mile walk back to the schoolhouse, to be back for 8 o'clock in the morning. And now he did this for like 2 or 3 years, I believe it was. So he was a very, very avid observer. Both these characters, I find astronomical history, as you probably see from some of my videos, very, very interesting. And I love studying these old observers of the moon. And this is one of the stories that I found really, really, really intriguing. But notice, I just love Krieger's work. These maps they're photographic looking. They're very, very detailed. If you look at photographs today taken, you can see where Krieger has actually cut off some of these rills and sharp, rills and channels in the moon and made them a little sharper than they actually are. That's a tendency of a lot of people who do artistry work on the moon and draw the moon. But you have to remember, these fellows were working back in the day when you either work visually or with photographs, which were long exposure and taken through a murky atmosphere, which is bubbling away. Now, the work that I do with my imaging and all other amateurs that image today, we use the video technique where you're shooting at 15 to 30 frames per second. So what you're doing is, when you get these moments of very nice still seeing, you're freezing them in these freeze frames of very short exposures during that 15 or 30 seconds every exposure. And say you take a 2,000 frame video, you go through those frames, find a very, very sharp frame. There'll be some that are blurred from the seeing, and others where the seeing is steadied and you get this beautiful, beautiful sharp image. You pick that image, say it was this image on the computer, you pick it and say, okay, I want 50%, the top 50% of images that match this quality to be kept, and the 50% that don't come to this quality, throw it out. So you end up saving 1,000 of the 2,000 videos, the best 1,000 of 2,000, and those best of 1,000 images are stacked into a final image which you post-process and make a beautiful finished image of the moon. So we have a big advantage over the observers of the past. But again, this whole little video I've just thrown here together tonight, again, was to talk about these observers and to talk about the differences in the moon and how observers will see things differently from other observers, and why, when you look at old maps and you look at the same feature and you compare it from one map to another, why there's a difference. There's a difference because telescopes got better over time. People had different abilities in drawing. The moon and sun angle change constantly. So you can go to the telescope, observe, come back a half an hour later, and you can detect changes in that small amount of time. So no, there's no conspiracy. There's nothing crazy going on. The moon is not a hologram. It is real, and we are not having a story hidden from us. Don't know where that type of thinking comes from, but as I've said in the past, everybody out there has their own thing. If they want to believe it, that's fine. I'm not here to argue with them. It's just the way it is. People tend to believe these conspiracy type things, and I, of course, do not. Well, anyway, that's going to be it. I'm going to end this here. Again, I am sorry for that audio problem. I'm going to check this video, and hopefully the audio on this one is much better. If it is, of course, you'll see it. And I wish you all a happy holiday season. If you don't celebrate the holidays, I wish you a great new year coming up. And so with that, I say again, good health, clear skies, and hopefully we'll be seeing you sometime after this winter season, with some new videos, when I can get out and observe when the weather gets a little spring-like again. Although right now it's going to be 70 degrees here in Connecticut tomorrow, which is just totally unbelievable. But that will not last, of course. So we'll see you again shortly, folks. Again, good health, clear skies, and see you soon. Take care.